Hey everyone, welcome to the Scng Newsmakers series conversation with sports agent Leigh Steinberg. I'm Erin McKinley. I'm the Reader Engagement Manager, and I'll be helping out Scng today for our Zoom meetup. Okay, gang, if you're just joining us here, we're about to get started. This is the Scng Newsmakers series, and we're going to start here in 1 minute. I just wanted to go ahead and introduce to you one of Scng's senior editors. He's an award-winning journalist and former sports beat writer covering the NFL, the UFC, and also he ran our sports department and now serves as a Register's senior editor and oversees the Register's daily news operations. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce to you Todd Harmonson.
Thanks, Erin. And thank you all to all of our subscribers and other readers who are joining us for this fun event. We really think it can be a great start to a series of virtual events that we're going to do here to get us all through a difficult time and maybe make things a little more interesting for you. We sincerely hope that you and your families are staying healthy and safe during this time. And it's a great chance to use technology to bring us together and talk about sports, which is something that has kind of been out of the conversation a bit too much lately, as far as I'm concerned. My current role is as a senior editor of the Register, and that means I'm dealing with politics a lot. And lately, the coronavirus, way too much, of course. But I spent the first 28 years of my career in sports as a reporter and an editor. So I am really looking forward to this chat with two people I've known for much of that time. First, I'd like to introduce our co-host tonight. It's Kevin Modeski. He's our Rams writer for the Southern California News Group. Known Kevin for a long time, and many of you will think of him covering the NFL, but I go back to thinking of a day that he and I spent with Muhammad Ali many years ago, kind of a highlight of my career. Kevin, welcome.
Yeah, me too. There are times as a sports writer when the biggest reward is that people envy the things you see and the people you get to meet, and Muhammad Ali was certainly high on the list for me. By way of introduction, let me tell you why I'm excited about today's topic and today's guest, of course. I returned to sports writing last year to cover the LA Rams for our newspapers. I had been a sports writer, a sports columnist, a sports editor for a lot of years, but then I'd gone away from that, taken a step down in class, some would say, to cover politics for a number of years. When I came back to sports, I probably had a different perspective than I used to about what makes sports special, what makes them important, and the priority that we place on them. And of course, here in 2020, that's a lot of the discussion surrounding sports as we look forward to, hopefully, eventually, the return of sports safely for everybody on and off the field. I expect this will be part of the conversation that we have today, and I can think of nobody better to educate us a little bit on the subject of sports place, economics, and the future. So can't wait. Todd, let's get on with it.
Okay. When I started covering the NFL for the Register nearly 22 years ago, I got some great advice from an NFL writer at the time. He said, call Leigh Steinberg. He is the guy that you need to know. He will know everybody that you also need to know and the things that you need to learn as a young NFL beat writer. Well, maybe I wasn't that young, but I was new to the NFL beat. So I did reach out to Leigh right away, and he was gracious enough to spend some time with me, talking me through some things like the attempt to get a team back to Los Angeles. This was 1998. That expansion team ended up being the Houston Texans, for anybody who doesn't keep track. But eventually there was a team. Leigh was at the top of the industry then and has climbed back to an amazing comeback that maybe even is more dramatic at times than the movie he inspired, Jerry Maguire, for those of you who are fans. Leigh represents the top quarterback in the NFL in Patrick Mahomes, and the one who gives me, a Miami Dolphins fan for life, some hope. And I've worked on this name for a little bit, so Tua Tagovailoa. Closely?
Tagovailoa.
There we go. All right. So Leigh, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you start off just sharing a little bit of your background and what's brought you to this point?
So I grew up in Los Angeles, went to UCLA for a year, and it was the 60s, and you had to be in Berkeley. So I went to Berkeley undergrad and law school. I was student body president when the governor was Ronald Reagan. And every time we demonstrated, he cracked down. So I learned everything I needed to know about negotiating from interfacing with Governor Reagan. We laughed about it later. He gave me an award, but it, it was sort of conflict ridden then. I became a dorm counselor in an undergraduate dorm while I was working my way through law school. They moved the freshman football team into the dorm. And one of the students was Steve Bartowski, who became, in 1975, the very first player picked in the NFL draft. We also had in that dorm sort of a techie named Steve Wozniak was one of them, and the fellow who founded PowerBar. But so I was choosing between different law jobs and probably going to work for the Alameda County DA. And I took a trip, jumped in the Nile, got sick. So when I came back, I couldn't work. And Bartowski then asked me to negotiate his contract. We got the largest rookie contract in history. There was a World Football League competing then against the NFL. They actually paid their players not in dollars, but in a percentage of the attendance. And Orange County had the Orange County Sun with Pat Hayden and all the rest. But at any rate, we arrived in Atlanta to sign the contract, and we get to the airport the night before, and there are Klieg lights flashing in the sky. A crowd is pressed up against the police line. And the first thing we heard was, we interrupt the Johnny Carson show to bring you a special news bulletin. Steve Bartowski, Leigh Steinberg have just come to the Atlanta airport for the signing. We switch you live for an in-depth interview. I looked at Bart probably the way that Dorothy looked at Toto when they arrived in Munchkin Land, and I said, I know we're not in Berkeley anymore. So I saw that idol worship and veneration and made it a part of the practice. My dad had two core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family, and the other was make a meaningful impact in the world and help people who can't help themselves. So I knew I wanted to try to make this work, and I saw that athletes had all the idol worship, and I thought, well, if they would go back to their high school community and plant roots, do a scholarship fund, work with a Boys and Girls Club or church, and then go to the athletic community at the college and do a give back that related them to the alums, and then at the pro level put together a charitable foundation where they put the leading political figures, community leaders, and business leaders on a charitable board, and then execute a program to attack a problem near and dear to their life that they could really make an impact. So that's been the philosophy. We've represented 64 first-round draft picks in football, the very first player overall in the draft 8 times, have 11 players in the Hall of Fame. Baseball, I had a big practice with my partner, Jeff Morad. We had 60 players. Basketball, I've done boxing with Lennox Lewis as a client and Oscar De La Hoya. And, but again, it's all been trying to take a holistic approach and help an athlete become a role model and then prepare them for second career. So this last draft was my 46th draft. And while internally I feel like a very young person, there was no sports agency, Todd, when I started. Somebody like Mike Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals could just slam down the phone and say, we don't deal with agents. So it was very rudimentary, and obviously there have been exponential changes in everything.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks for that background, Leigh. And you know, you've come through a lot, but nobody's ever seen what we're going through in the sports landscape right now with the coronavirus. I think that's the biggest question that everybody's got on their mind, and we want to start with that. how does the NFL have a season during a pandemic? And what are your thoughts about what it would take to make that happen, especially when it comes to player safety?
So the first thing that would happen in early August would be the players would go off to training camp. Now, there's a bit of a quarantine feel to training camp anyway, because you're either at some obscure college living in a dorm or in a hotel in the city, but they've got the players together. So you could use temperature testing, you could use swab testing, you could do all that and isolate anybody from the unit. So that's the first step. Now we go to games. They've already announced a schedule that is regular. It starts September 10th and it runs for the whole season, which will have 17 games this year, and regular season and 3 exhibition. So the next question is, you're providing television content so for those of us who are tired of watching Tiger King on Netflix for the 3rd time, we'll have actual sports to be able to see. Then the next question is, could you have attendance? Now, right now, for example, in California, Gavin Newsom's saying no live attendance, but we're mid-May, we've got June, July, August before September games would start. And then the question is, what could you do with fans? Could you have them enter and temperature test them? Could you have them wear masks? Could you design a seating chart that socially distances them? Safety is, of course, the most important concern, but I believe that we could have a fairly normal football season because none of us sitting on this call have any real predictive ability in terms of where the virus goes.
I'm going to turn it over to Kevin here for a question in just a moment, but I did want to welcome all of our people who have joined us in progress and let you know this is an SCNG Newsmakers live event. We're doing this on Zoom for the first time, so bear with us, but I think it's going pretty well so far. We've got our Rams writer, Kevin Modeski, and superagent Leigh Steinberg. Kevin, why don't you take it away?
Now, Leigh, I wanted to ask you about the team that I cover and probably that a lot of people listening in root for. You go back a long way with the LA Rams. You've represented a lot of their great players. You were involved in getting football back to Los Angeles. How do you think the franchise is doing? It's an interesting time, 4 years after the return to LA, a year removed from a Super Bowl, moving into a multi-billion-dollar new stadium, but also facing some issues with players leaving this off season, salary cap issues, and maybe stiffer competition in the LA market with the Chargers. A lot of things there to consider, but how should LA Rams fans feel right now?
I think they should feel pretty good. Remember that back in '94, when the Rams announced they were going to move, I put together a committee with 150 business people called Save the Rams. And we blocked the vote the first time, but ultimately Giorgio Frontieri took the team to St. Louis for this amazing upfront payment. Wait for it. Like in Austin Powers, $30 million is what you left for. The franchise value of the Rams the year prior to them returning, and we have an outstanding person in our firm, our VP of Media, Julia Farron, who worked for the Rams for, I believe, 12 years, is doing great things for us. But that was what the value was. Now they're valued at $3 billion. So the reason these teams have moved into this market is that because 17 million people can get the television signal, you have this massive market for local TV and radio. You have for merchandising, you can sell out. So under the leadership of Sean McVay, they took a big step forward in 2018 and looked like they were destined. But you go to Super Bowl and what happens is every one of your players is overvalued in free agency. They all believe they were the critical factor in making it. There are all sorts of events and things that happen for a Super Bowl team. And it's very difficult. The salary cap now means that we have a two-tiered system in terms of paying players. You'll have 6 or 7 superstars on a team that get really amazing contracts, but it means that their backups are all players that are playing at the minimum. So one injury can really have an impact. Obviously, it's a change, but you have to look at the organization. And I believe Stan Kroenke, Kevin Demoff, Sean McVay are fundamentally sound. So if they're fundamentally sound and they have a plan and they know how to draft and they know how to trade and they know how to do all those things, ultimately, those are the franchises that prosper. We have a salary cap, which was designed to create parity. We have the reverse order in the draft designed to give the teams that struggle the better players out of the draft, but none of that works because in establishing parity, if it did, the New England Patriots wouldn't be the way they do. I went to Cal Berkeley. I think that Jared Goff is, each year he plays, he'll get better reads on the field. The game is so confusing for a collegiate quarterback when they come up. The players move faster, the defenses are more complex. It just takes a while for the game to slow down in their mind and get a better read on the field. So I think he's going to be fine. We have a client, Daryl Henderson, on the team who hopefully will get more of a chance to play. They just drafted a running back. I think the Rams will be fine.
Great. So Leigh, your journey has had its highs and lows, and they're well documented. I've appreciated that you've always been really open about it. Just as the lockdown was starting, I saw a Facebook post from you talking about reaching 10 years of sobriety. First, congratulations. Great milestone, and I know something you've worked hard for. Second, how is the road taken to that point where you're back representing some of the top players? Have you grown a lot in those 10 years? Are you a different person?
So I struggled with the fact that my father died of cancer. It was sort of the rock in my life. My kids were diagnosed with a rare eye disease that caused blindness. We lost a home to mold. There was nothing in the work world. I go in every day expecting there'll be obstacles. And I responded the wrong way. I numbed the pain with alcohol. And I got to the point in 2010 where I said, enough is enough. If nothing else, if I never have a career again, I'll be able to be sober and be a good father. And that really is the comeback in all this. So I went into a 12-step program, moved into sober living. If you are out there and you're struggling with an addictive substance and you're hopeless, just know there are 12-step groups with great fellowships that will help you. People are out willing, don't despair. There is hope ahead. So, I did all the steps in that program, and gradually, I wanted to wait long enough to go back into representation to make sure I had a solid foundation. And that was 10 years ago. And in March, I celebrated my 10th sober birthday. I always call it 10 years on the sunny side of the street. So what did I learn from that? I learned just how important my kids were, but I always knew that. And the ability to make a difference in the world has been how I've always motivated myself, not by the amount of money and contracts or the rest, but are we doing a good thing? Our players have raised almost $700 million for charity, and I wasn't doing that. So the reality is that, I probably learn more balance in that situation. But the key lesson is resilience, Todd. Life will push you back. Life will give you reverses. But can you rise from being knocked back and see the light at the end of the tunnel, optimism. So I'm the person who, if I walk into a barn and it's all filled with defecation, I think there's a pony in it somehow. So what saved me was resilience and also proportionality. I was not a starving peasant in Darfur. I did not have the last name Steinberg in Nazi Germany. I wasn't sick. I didn't have problems. How was it responsible to look at those problems and just have to numb them? So I've come to a brighter way to deal with problems in personal life.
Great. Kevin?
Now, Leigh, I think we're all pretty certain that the coronavirus pandemic is changing sports in the near term. We'll see in the next few months exactly how. I wonder how you think it's going to change sports in the long term, maybe even permanently, and how you think it might be different in the NFL from other sports.
Well, the NFL dominates this country. We've never had a time where a sport not only was the most popular sport by 3-1, but was the most popular television show. So every week, 5 of the top 10 rated, Nielsen rated nighttime television shows are football. We're in the midst of a football frenzy. People can enjoy it in a multiplicity of ways. They play fantasy football. They bet. They buy merchandise. There are all sorts of new apps. I'm developing an app that you take to the game, so millennials who want to multitask and have a hard time sitting through 3 hours and have maybe 22 minutes of real action. So down one side will run your fantasy bets, down one side of your phone. And down the other side will run your gambling bets. Underneath you'll have text capacity so you can talk smack to people in or out of the stadium. We'll let the fans vote on one play call that the coach has to call. We'll let the fans vote on one referee overturn, so that bad call you can change. And when you touch it, you can order from a snack bar. And when you touch it, you get an unrelenting diet of other games, puzzles, quizzes, all of which monetized at the end. So I think that the future for pro football is really bright. We're seeing the introduction of things like virtual reality. Patrick Mahomes has participated in a VR project where you put the helmet on, you put the headset on, and now you're in Arrowhead Stadium. And you see the defensive players running at you, and you hold the football, and according to what you do with it, you're either going to get sacked, throw a touchdown pass, but it's the most real experience ever. And I think we'll continue to see this sort of thing grow. I think professional sports will be just fine when they come back. Football's a passion. They're running a normal schedule. Hopefully they'll find a way to have fans there. If not, the next year. And but I think the state of sports in general is healthy. Baseball is a sport where years ago when they had the strike, owners complained nonstop about revenue, right? And they were going broke. Their TV contracts are so big, their online presence is so big that sport is flourishing. And hopefully we'll see very soon what's happening is the Players Association is negotiating with management over what the terms will be. They proposed an 82 game season with spring training that would start in June, and then in July they would have the games regionally focused so that our local teams would probably play a lot on the West Coast in Arizona. So I think sports are going to rebound. Look at the ratings for the NFL draft. Now, I'm excited by the NFL draft. I think it's a real rush to see a player come up through Pop Warner, and then he's sitting in a room surrounded by everybody who's been part of the journey, and the tension ratchets up, and then all of a sudden an explosion of joy and euphoria. But it's not quite the most exciting thing in the world, and the ratings were off the roof. So I think the future is very bright.
You don't think Roger's the most exciting guy in his sweater with his M&Ms and
Mr. Rogers' neighborhood? Yes. I think the biggest beneficiary of the draft is Roger Goodell has been under such fire, you know, from Ray Rice and Tom Brady and domestic violence and all that, that they did a very good job humanizing him.
Definitely. All right. You've mentioned him. I've mentioned him. Patrick Mahomes is the guy that really excites people as a quarterback in the league. Base salary this coming season, $850,000, maybe the biggest bargain in sports. The Chiefs have picked up his option, but lurking out there, many people think is going to be the biggest contract in NFL history. One, do you think it will be? I kind of guessed the answer there. And why is he the guy who should land that kind of a deal?
So what I have to say about his upcoming contract negotiation is nothing, okay? It'll take care of itself. He has a contract, and we're relaxed about the timing of all that. Now, football has become a quarterback-centric sport, and it's very difficult to get to and through the playoffs and to the Super Bowl without a franchise quarterback. So let's define that as someone you can win because of rather than with, who you can build a team around for 10 to 12 years, and who, most importantly, in adversity, in critical situations, you know, the quarterback's throwing a couple interceptions, the crowd's starting to boo, the center's looking at the quarterback like he's on hallucinogens, the game's getting out of hand. Now, what does the quarterback do? Can he compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind, and elevate his level of play to take a team to and through victory? That player is irreplaceable. And when you lead a team back in 3 straight games from sometimes crushing positions where, you know, you're behind 24-0, he is preternaturally mature, grounded, has the ability to elevate a team, has a ridiculous throwing arm, inspires his teammates, is a great leader, and with all the fame that's come to him, he remains grounded. So he's been someone that you wouldn't know that he's in the center of all this. His focus has been this offseason on getting back and winning the Super Bowl again. You know, as a charitable foundation called 15 in the Mahomes, it's done a lot of good for at-risk, troubled, or ailing or sick youth. And if you like him on the field, you'll love him off the field.
Well, that's terrific. And I hope in a couple of years we'll be saying a lot of these things about Tua as well, but that's just me. Kevin, before we get to some questions from our attendees, and there's so many of them out there, do you have anything else for Leigh?
Well, I heard you use the word gambling in talking about your app, and it wasn't too long ago that somebody in a position of prominence like yours wouldn't have so casually used that word. I'm wondering, are you an optimist, or maybe it sounds like you are, about the effects that expanded legalization of gambling will have on sports?
The biggest single threat to professional sports would be the concept that if you somehow compromised a player who had gambling debts, and they then shaved their performance, that it would impact the game. Fans tune in because they believe it's real, played on an even playing field with both sides equally motivated, same rules, same everything. And if we ever lose that, we would go the way of wrestling, right? Where you know it's a stage entertainment. We can't have that. On the other hand, the sport's already pretty pregnant with owners who invest in fantasy apps, right? With casinos that advertise in stadia and arena. And I believe we're soon going to see a day where you'll be able to place a bet like at a racetrack at the stadium itself. And so the revenue is staggering. And you know the NFL would rather have that revenue than have it go to Las Vegas or Indian casinos or all the rest of it. So I think we're going to evolve to a situation where you can bet on virtually anything in the stadium. You know, who's kicking off, who scores the first touchdown, and on and on and on, because it's always been a dirty little secret of a sport like football that many people are motivated by the ability to bet. And I used to sit in the stadium and the game would be totally over out of hand, and a team would score a touchdown at the end, and all of a sudden there was tremendous, it was point spread. Okay, so I wish in a pure world we didn't go this way, because again, nothing can kill professional sports. Bad behavior doesn't do it. We don't like it and we don't want it to be there, but bad off the field or on the field behavior doesn't do it. What could do it would be this sense that the sport's not played on an even playing field. So I would have been just fine with gambling segregated from the sport, but it's here and it's coming.
Oh, great. And Leigh, I think you were singing Kevin's tune when you were talking about having it like horse racing where you can bet right there and while the game's going on. I've spent some days with Kevin at the track. All right, I'm going to start passing along some of the questions that our readers, subscribers have submitted, and I think they've got some good ones. First one up is, what was the most difficult negotiation you've ever had, and why?
So the key in negotiating is your listening skills. The most undervalued skill in life to succeed in everything, relationships, work, parenting, is the ability to listen and peel back the layers of the onion so that you tune into someone else's greatest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams. And if you can put your head in the head and heart of another person and see the world the way they see it, then you can solve any problem. And then there was a guy named Mike Brown who owns the Cincinnati Bengals. And Mike Brown was put in this world to make sure that I understood how blessed I was, right? And to make sure that I never became grandiose. Because I had the first round draft pick of the Cincinnati Bengals in 1987, 1992, 1994, 1999. And if I was representing astronauts, Mike Brown would be commissioner of the moon. So every negotiation with him was torturous. It was difficult because as much as I listened, all I heard was one thing: no money.
It's amazing that players sometimes just don't want to go there. Huh. All right, so we've got another one. Should college athletes be paid? And how would you determine that kind of a compensation if so?
So here's the problem. If you come from a middle class or affluent family, then the scholarship check's fine. But if you come from a rough or financially rough background, it's not fine. And you go to UCLA or SC, you're living in a big urban area. UCLA's in Holmby Hills and Bel Air. So you have to live off campus. You have to have a car to get to school. And the underprivileged athletes may send some of that scholarship check home. So they're left at a lower standard of living than their non-athletic peers. Because if you're not an athlete on a college campus, you can work during the school year, you can work during the summer, you can supplement your income, but the athletes in a practical sense can't. So I've always favored taking athletes would need. And we don't need to pay them like the Sultan of Brunei, but just give them enough spending money so they have an equivalent life. Because they go to the student store and they see their jersey number being sold, they see the TV contracts, they see the big fans, and they believe that they're being ripped off. Now, you can argue that they get the benefit of a college scholarship, but many of the players on college campuses have no real interest in doing anything but getting to the pros. So I would allow, like Jim Harbaugh just suggested, any player that comes out of high school to make themselves eligible for any draft. Now, the horror of that is that somebody who has no real chance to make it will be deluded and try to go into pro sports. But think about football. You're not going to have a freshman offensive tackle try to make it in the NFL. They're 260, but they'll be 320 at the end. You're not going to have a quarterback. They need time to do it. So eventually they'll see that the bodies are bigger, faster, and the rest of it, and they should wait. And then you'll have motivated players on the campus. Now, California passed SB 206, which said that California collegiate athletes can have marketing agents and market their own name and likeness. But the start date was 2023, and the reason that Representative Skinner did that was to put pressure on the NFL. Other states started realizing they had to compete with California, so they started doing the same thing. And then the NCAA passed guidelines that will start in January, where now athletes can have marketing agents. How many people will it affect? Not many. In basketball, one and done takes the biggest stars out of the game, so by the time they started to market, they'd already be in the pros. It will be a college football quarterback. Think Johnny Manziel, think Jameis Winston. These were players who won big early in huge televised bowl games. And so they had enough brand. This is not going to affect a lot of players, but it will affect the players that are most apt to take money from alums and take money from agents. It could have the effect of cleaning that up.
Okay. There's one I like, because you're a football fan from, you've loved your football for a long time. So what great player from the past who was before the era where agents really had an effect, who would you have liked to have represented and helped get what he really deserved?
So I fell in love with pro football. College football, my parents have 5 degrees between them from UCLA. So they dragged me to the Coliseum back in the 50s when they played the single wing and players played 2 ways. And so that's how I started. But for pro football, I started in the LA Coliseum and rooted for the Rams growing up. Now, our seats cost $1. And they were so far from the field that you would have needed a high-powered telescope to see it. But I loved Roman Gabriel. I loved Bob Waterfield. I loved John Arnett. Later, I loved Merlin Olsen. There were so many stars on that team. But Roman Gabriel was chiseled, handsome, mediagenic. I think we could have marketed him really well.
That's great. So out of the players you represent, or from what you've heard around the league, what technology are they using to train during this time so they can do it remotely?
Mostly Zoom, mostly the same technology we're doing. They have meetings all day, and then they're trying to do virtual exercises. The problem with this is that in the last 10 years since the 2011 collective bargaining agreement, teams were now allowed to take rookies, bring them to mini camp, which they've always done, but then instead of going home and taking time off and going straight to training camp with no more experience in that, they've kept them in the team city for what are called OTAs. And these players have had a whole month or 5 weeks to meet with their coaches, meet with the players they'll be playing with, practice at times with the players, going through plays, and this group's not going to have the benefit of it. So technology is fine, but talk to a student who's taking a college class on Zoom. Some classes translate fine and others are completely confusing. So I think they'll be potentially at a little bit of a disadvantage, but that's the way that football operated for many, many years, and the players did fine. We took a look at 2011 when there was a lockout. And so the players didn't get the benefit of OTAs, and they ended up doing just fine. So I think this rookie class will be fine. The positions that take the most adjustment are quarterback because it's repetition, and offensive line because it's repetition. So those are the ones that need a running back who runs well in college can probably just get out there and run well in the pros, but certain positions take more time.
Sure. Okay. One of our readers is asking, given the research on CTE, concussions, they're saying that no parents or grandparents that they know want their grandkids to play football. You've tried to raise awareness about this a lot of education work on that. Where do you see the long-term future of football in regards to player safety like that?
The problem with football is I had a crisis of conscience back in the late 80s. I kept seeing our quarterbacks get hit. We'd go to doctors to ask how many was too many, what's the magic number, what are the long-term effects, and the doctors couldn't tell us. So I held the first player safety conference in Newport Beach back in '94, and we had neurologists and helmet manufacturers and all the folks there, at least talking to the players. I've done 14 of them since, and here's sort of what I know, that every time an offensive lineman hits a defensive lineman at the line of scrimmage, it creates a low-level concussive event. A little bit of change. So an offensive lineman could walk out of football, having played in high school, college, and the pros, with 10,000 subconcussive hits, none of which have been diagnosed and none of which he's aware of. But the aggregate almost certainly would do what 3+ concussions does, which trigger a higher rate of Alzheimer's, of ALS, of premature senility, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and depression. So let's say 50% of the moms in this country understand this, and they tell their teenage boys, you can play any sport, but not tackle football. It wouldn't kill football, but it would turn it into a gladiator sport like boxing, where only kids from underprivileged backgrounds who need it economically would play it. So that's why, whether it's new rules that teach blocking and tackling without the head at a younger age, having players young people start tackle football later, trying to come up with a helmet with new technology that uses coil and compression to dissipate or attenuate the energy that hits the helmet, and nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals that prophylactically protect the brain, and then ultimately, can we heal the brain? The Amen Clinic here in Orange County has done amazing stuff in trying to rehabilitate players. So the question is, can you heal the post-concussed brain? And there seems to be some potential there. They use hyperbaric chambers, they use interactive teaching techniques, and they seem to be able to improve the brain, but the players are bigger, stronger, and faster. So the G-force at the line of scrimmage is measurably higher than it's ever been. No one thought you'd be able to create a super athlete who weighs 260 pounds and can run a 4.5 40. If you've never stood on the sideline of a game and you only watch it on TV, and Kevin knows this, the when those bodies hit together, it's extraordinary how much force there is. And every game in football is like a traffic accident on almost every play. So I love football. I think it teaches great values, but we have work to do on concussion.
Some of us writers were talking last year before a game. Would you be willing to field one punt on an NFL field? You can't call fair catch.
Kevin, it's so funny you say that, because whenever people talk about that the players aren't tough enough, you know, or whatever, all I tell someone is put the pads on, go out onto the field, and take one hit from a defensive lineman. If you can get out of bed for the next 2 weeks, you'll be lucky. The reason football players can stand that much contact is they have freakish bodies that can withstand pain better, have higher pain tolerance, and then they have a remarkable rehabilitative ability. One day, Troy Aikman had disc surgery, and I went to see him in the hospital, and he's walking around. And I said, Troy, did the doctor tell you to do this? He said, no, but isn't it great? So they have freakish bodies, but no one should be under the illusion that a normal body can withstand getting hit with that force repeatedly.
Yeah. Injuries are one part of it. There's also the off the field stuff that someone in your role has to deal with. Somebody was asking about Giants player who recently was arrested. We don't need to talk about that case specifically, but in your role, how does that process start for you when you're first deciding whether you'll represent somebody? You're looking for character people, I know, but then you're going to have to deal with the times when they slip up.
So first of all, we profile players to make sure we're getting someone with a good heart, a social conscience, with a stellar work ethic, because it's not just talent, it's that with a passion for the game, who's going to make an impact off the field and be successful in second career and help other people. So that eliminates some of the problems. But in the first sessions we spend with an athlete, we say, you are playing in a public entertainment, okay? If you want to play purist football, go play on a practice field or a park. No one will criticize you and the rest of it. But fans attend games, spend money on concessions, participate in fantasy sport, not to read about an unremitting diet of bar fights and domestic violence. They don't need that, and we risk pushing fans away if we concentrate too much on the economics or bad behavior. These players have the capacity to be role models. So here's what we do. We sit down and say, look, if you're going to go in a place where alcohol is served, first of all, you need a designated driver. The NFLPA actually has Ubers for players who are out in clubs and the rest of it. Second of all, you got to be able to walk away from a fight, because what will happen is you might hurt the person, you get sued, you get arrested, you have to explain to your team and all the rest. So go out with some friends who will intervene when some 5'6" guy who's drunk tells you that your mother is this or that and tries to challenge you. Third of all, in your relationships with women or anyone else, you cannot put your hands on anyone in anger. You're in essence like a boxer who's got these fists that can kill. You cannot ever do that. You have to be very careful. Now, if you're not willing to do these things, graciously sign autographs, be responsive to the press, because without them, no one would know anything about this. And you're not willing to hold yourself to a higher standard of behavior than other people, go play on the sandlot. But this is what is required of you for all the great benefits and largesse you get from the sport. So prevention is the best cure.
Did you have to have any conversations with players about standing or not standing for the national anthem when that was controversy?
I did. So first of all, I think the fact that players are interested in social issues is good. Personally, I felt like if you wanted to stand up against bad police shootings or conditions in the inner city, you could go to a rally, write a letter, do a post, do something like that. The danger in having that happen in a stadium is people from disparate backgrounds and values come, and political views come together around the unifying factor of sport. So it's sort of a slippery slope. If I admire standing up for those issues, but is the next one about abortion and players who think that that a sport, that a country that would countenance that is engaged in killing? And do we have that demonstration out there? And then what's the next demonstration? So, but our players who did feel like they wanted to demonstrate, we supported them, and it did have an impact because the NFL put a fair amount of money into inner city programs and all the rest of it. And there's obviously heavy focus on police shootings, and so I thought that was good. And so I think it's the problem athletes have is self-absorption. And if they live in a little homunculus, which is made up just of athletes and have no larger vision of the world, they tend to be self-absorbed. Self-absorbed means enough about me. Can we talk about how you feel about me? That's self-absorption. And you're trying to get the player, one of the things we do with them is to say, look, when you walk into a banquet or something else, instead of standing up against the wall and waiting for people to come to you, I want you to learn how to network. Walk up to that middle-aged businessman, talk to him for 5 minutes, establish some rapport, collect a card. When you get home, write on the back of the card, middle-aged man with carbuncle on his nose who is into plastics. But this is the basis for second career. So self-absorption is a difficulty, and we work very hard to get players to be more outer-directed.
So we've talked about the high character athletes. Who's just been a fun character that you've represented? Somebody that has kind of made you smile because, you know, this is somebody who's entertaining.
Well,
person,
in the past, a player like Cordell Stewart, who was the quarterback for Pittsburgh and then Chicago, I mean, just talking to him made him smile. Currently, we have a player named Jamal Williams, and he has such a zany sense of humor. If you watch him in warm-up, he'll be dancing, he'll be entertaining the crowd, he'll be interacting with them. They had when the Packers, he's a Packer, when the Packers closed training camp, they have a parade. So he was on a little tricycle. Players are funny. And I'm sure, Todd, you and Kevin can both attest to this. They have wicked senses of humor. And they're fun to be around. One of the things about athletes is because they have prodigious physical size, they're not afraid to express their emotions. I mean, a player will tell you he loves you. And you can form in this close relationships. Warren Moon and I were together for 6 years in Canada, 17 in the NFL, and I had the pleasure of being someone who represented athletes presenting a player at the Hall of Fame. And it was really one of the high points of my career, because we'd taken that journey together and we sort of grew up together from 1978 to 2000.
Yeah, one of our readers, I was just looking at the question, asked if Warren had played his entire career in the NFL, how ridiculous would his numbers have been? And would that have changed people's perception of him a little bit? Because I think at times he's a little overlooked in the discussion of the all-time greats.
Well, he is in the Hall of Fame.
There's that.
Part of the problem is, except for someone like Dan Marino, quarterback greatness is judged by the ability to get to and win the Super Bowl. So Troy Aikman didn't have the best stats in the world. In a game, he'd go 17 for 23 for 215 yards. but he won 3 Super Bowls. So Warren played 6 years in Canada. At that time in the NFL, there was a prevalent feeling among certain executives, coaches, scouts, that African Americans were not suitable to play the so-called thinking positions in football: center, quarterback, safety, or linebacker, who was in charge of the thing. And that was one of the motivations for Warren to go to Canada, so he could establish himself. It happened that we timed it so his contract ended and he was a total free agent, which had never happened in the NFL. And there was a USFL, an NFL, and the CFL. And here you could take a young player at the most important position in his prime and give up nothing for him. So it was a wild ride. We had 14 teams talk to him. We took a tour across the country, and ultimately came down to Houston, then the Oilers against Seattle. And Houston guaranteed, put a ton of the contract in bonus, and Seattle didn't. There were no guaranteed contracts then. There actually are a number of guaranteed football contracts now. Basically, in the first round, the players at the top, like the contract we just did for Tua, are totally guaranteed for skill, meaning if you were getting cut, you'd still get the salaries remaining on the package, and injury, meaning if you suffered a career-ending injury, that you would get paid the remaining salaries. Then as you get down in the round, it's 3 years plus, guaranteed and 1 not. And then in the second round, it's 2 plus 2. So that's like a revolution in professional football, because the only way that players had guaranteed money was the signing bonus.
Yeah, it's not like, say, the Albert Pujols contract that is guaranteed forever. I think he still has another 10 years or so on that one.
I think we'll be old and gray before Pujols.
I'm already there, Leigh.
Before Pujols' contract expires. But he's a great guy.
Yeah. So are you okay? We're hitting 6 o'clock, but are you okay with taking a few more questions?
It's as opposed to going home and watching Netflix. Yeah, I think I'm okay.
All right. Well, Tiger King #4 is around for you if you want to watch it again.
Isn't that bizarre?
It was
bizarre.
The things that we'll do during a pandemic to entertain ourselves. So the NFL has always seemed interested in expanding its reach. Playing the games in Europe, playing the games in Mexico, and London always seemed like a possibility. I wonder, does this year dealing with the pandemic slow things down? Does it change that future for the league?
It does slow things down, because I never thought it was very likely they'd put franchises there. I mean, when we fly from the West Coast, it's like 12 hours over and 14 back. It's a little less from the East Coast, but it puts the players, when they play over there, out of their rhythm. And, to ask the Seattle Seahawks to fly and then have jet lag and then have all of that, it takes a while. And it takes them out of the normal rhythm of the season. So I never thought they would really expand but they worked hard to expand their brand. Baseball is a sport played around the world. Basketball is a sport played around the world. Hockey is a sport played around the world. But football is an American game that primarily, for the rest of the world, football, soccer, right? So I think that they can do good branding. I think they can continue to play those games, but I doubt we'll ever have an overseas franchise.
You work with people who, through your academy, people who are looking to break into the business. And we've had a couple of questions about what advice you would give to somebody who's at least looking at the possibility of switching in. Is it something that you advise people that this is a big career?
So I decided that people can go to grad school or law school or sports marketing, and what they learn are the principles. They don't really understand the skills. They couldn't go out and practice immediately. So we've designed with my partner Chris Cabot and Julia Farron a Agent Academy and a Sports Career Conference. The Agent Academy, which we did virtually last month, and had a sellout crowd. And you can go to steinbergsports.com, Agent Academy or Sports Career. So in that one, we actually get the attendees, we explain how to recruit. And then we have them get up as an agency and try to recruit a real player. So they've had to recruit Patrick Mahomes and his family. We have a mother, father, and so they get that experience. We give them a contract, which we've used different people, but half of them play general managers and half of them play player agents, and they have a laundry list of things they have to achieve. We get them up and teach them how to do a charitable foundation. We teach them, we do a marketing branding exercise. So all the core skills you need, and we'll be doing that, I think 7 or 8 more times across the country. Our next one was going to be in Atlanta, and May 30th, we'll be doing a sports career conference. So you come and you have an hour talking to people in your field, either print media, electronic media, internet media, and they talk to the young people about how they broke into the sport and what their tips are and what their job constitutes. And then we have a marketing branding one that talks about how to market or brand a player. And then we have one that helps you work for a team, a league, a conference, or an athletic department. And then we have sports entrepreneurship, which are programs like I talked with Kevin about with a new app or a new concept. And then we talk about sports philanthropy, and how to make a difference in the world. So you can sign up and come to those things. The first question always is, if you want to be a player agent, how do you start? So each of the players' associations licenses or certifies the agents of athletes in team sport. So the NFL is the strictest. If you want to represent an NFL player, you need to have gone to undergrad. You need to have a post-grad degree. You need to take a test, which are really difficult. Half the people pass. You need to follow their regulations, and you're a certified agent. In baseball, you simply need to have a client. In basketball, they also have education requirements, and they do a test on the collective bargaining agreement, again, which is pretty tough. So, and the skill I most advise people to learn is psychology. Because if you can understand what motivates other people to act the way they do, anticipate it, everything's about people. And whether it's dealing with a team, an athlete, a marketer, everything revolves around your relationships with other people. So the listening skills I talked about before, understanding of psychology, will do well. Most of us in the field were poli-sci majors, and you don't have to be a lawyer to do any of this. There's not an awful lot of real legal skills. The contracts are all boilerplate, meaning they're standardized language. You can't change much of it, so you're really negotiating for terms. Agency has 3 parts to it, Todd. Recruiting, without which you're going to have problems being a good agent. Contract negotiation for both the player contract and then endorsements, and client maintenance and service, which means all the things that go into that. And basically you have to master all 3 skills.
So it's not just showing up at Super Bowl party.
No, and it's a hyper-competitive field. You have to be realistic with people. I mean, I'm probably partly to blame with Jerry Maguire, but I've spoken on 85 campuses across the country, and you're deluged with people that either want to be an agent or they want to do something in sport. And the field is so vast now. You can work in facilities management. You can work for an app. You can work in marketing or branding. You can work for a league, a team, a conference, an athletic department. You can work in PR. You can work for a players association. I mean, there are endless possibilities. So virtually everybody can find a niche. But here's the key. Can you distinguish yourself from the mass? Do you have a way of elevating your profile? I get 1,500 resumes over the course of a year. And they all are nice. They look the same. But one time I got a Sports Illustrated. And it was their font, their type, and everything. Only on the front of this Sports Illustrated was a young man and myself. And every article was cleverly written to talk about how our firm had been enhanced since we started. So if you're trying to, and we hired them. So if you're trying to break in, do something clever, do something innovative, show the same skills you would need. If you're young, get an internship. Get inside of any type of organization that will help you. I spoke at Baylor, and in Waco, they have the Dr. Pepper Hall of Fame. And I'm a big Diet Dr. Pepper person. Yes, I know it has additives and sucrose and all that. Thank you. I have 100 people tell me that a day. But anyway, I was talking about that experience, and then about a week later, a bottle of Diet Dr. Pepper shows up in the mail. Only this bottle wasn't established in 1887. It was established in 1975, the year that we started our firm. And on the front, it had that, and then it had a picture of a young man and myself. Now you turned over to the side and you looked at the ingredients, and it said 100% perseverance, 100% creativity, 100% loyalty, 100%, 100%. And we hired him because he had shown the ability to understand our organization and to highlight himself. So to whether you're applying for an internship or a job, or you're already in something, you have to do something to distinguish yourself so you become irreplaceable, non-modular, non-fungible. Because if you're replaceable, you will be replaced.
Love it. Hey, Kevin, do you have anything else for Leigh before we wrap up?
Well, Leigh, you talked about loving the NFL draft. I'm wondering how you're preparing for the 2021 draft and adjusting to the possibility that there won't be a college season quite as we know it. Maybe you already saw some changes in the way you had to present players to team front offices and scouts this year.
So I think there will be a football season. I'm not sure every single division or university will play in it, but I think there'll be major college football. It might not start till October, but I think they'll end up doing a season. I mean, our governor has shut down the state colleges in response, or shut down, so that won't happen. The first interesting issue is that if undergrads can have marketing people, then it would move the age at which you talk to players much earlier. Like with someone like Tua or someone like Jerry Jeudy, we don't talk to them until the spring or summer going into what looks to be their final year. But all of a sudden, the next Tua, the next whatever, can hire a marketing agent. Now, I assume that if it's a marketing agent that also represents players in their contract negotiation, they'd use the same person. Well, I've had a big baseball practice where I talk to the parents of 17-year-olds, but I've never talked to a football player who's that young. And normally they have parents helping them. So that's going to be a change because if you don't, prospectively, if you don't sign that player as a freshman or sophomore, you may never sign him. And those would be the biggest stars. In terms of how Corona impacts this all, we've already seen, when I started in 1975, here's how they did the draft. They played the season, they had all-star games, and they drafted in January. And the picks were just as good. We did a breakout of the 1975 draft and compared it to the 2005 draft with the whole second season of scouting, with the combine and all-star games and campus visits and pro scouting days and visits to teams and all the rest of it. And 75 did just as well. So I think you're going to see this crop succeed, this rookie crop. And I think you're going to see they don't really need that much information. The best predictor of future performance is current performance, right? So game film tells a lot. You can send a player to the combine who runs a 4.3 40 at wide receiver or defensive back, but can he catch the football? Can he run a route? Does he have work ethic? Will he study film? I mean, none of that. You can see it on game film, but so I think we'll be fine.
Now, Les Snead of the Rams talked about losing, pro days and face-to-face interviews between teams and players this year. And he said, in the end, everything you need to know about character and preparation and dedication shows up on Saturday on the field.
There's that, and they also do. They hire security firms, and they go back into a player's background. In some cases, elementary school, and they interview everybody they can, and they find out everything that they can about a player, because teams are scared to death of another Aaron Hernandez. And what happens now is, suppose you draft a player like that, give him a big signing bonus, and now he becomes disqualified from football. You not only lose as a franchise the money you paid him, he takes up so much cap space, you can't replace him, and then that would be if there's another equivalent player. So they are paranoid about behavior and also work ethic, because I will tell you that what you never saw with my clients like Troy Aikman and Steve Young and Bruce Smith and Thurman Thomas and all the rest of them, and current players, is when you see Patrick Mahomes throw a touchdown pass, that's this tip of this extensive preparation. He happens to have an eidetic memory, so he can remember every play, but he kills himself working on film, working on plays, and all the rest of it. And the great players do that. And you can test a player at the combine, and he can run really fast, but that doesn't really tell you what it'll be like in a game.
I do think we need to wrap up. One last question for you, Leigh, because I know you've got the Leigh Steinberg book club. What have you read recently? Give us one title that we should be looking for to get us through this time.
There's a book called The Splendid and the Vile, which is by the same person who wrote Devil in the City about mass murder in Chicago. He's written some really compelling books, Eric Larson. And it takes you through World War II and Winston Churchill. And it lays out a whole bunch of interesting facts. But they had the Blitz, where London's getting daily air raids where they're completely obliterating part of the city, and they have to live that way. It's really inspiring to consider our current situation and how people have dealt with things like that in the past.
That's terrific. And I did this.
If you want to join the book club, it's Leigh Steinberg Book Club. We have 1,500 members, It's a lot of fun. We have authors post on there. Go to Facebook, Leigh Steinberg Book Club.
I'm a member. And I definitely use this as a segue to let everybody who's on this know that our next one of these virtual events is going to be a book club kind of a thing. We have been doing a serialization of the book Norco 80, the true story of the most spectacular bank robbery in American history. It's been running every day in the Southern California News Group and on our websites. And we're going to have our the author, Peter Houlihan, on with one of our reporters 2 weeks from tonight. So we're hoping that everybody will want to return for that. And we're going to keep doing some of these things. And I do want to thank you all for being here. I especially wanted to thank Kevin for co-hosting this with me and doing a great job. And our featured guest, Leigh Steinberg. Really appreciate that you spent the time with us and were so forthcoming and interesting with all your responses tonight.
Well, I want to wish everyone out there to stay as safe as they can, and thank the first responders who are sort of heroes in this, but actually the 330 million Americans who have stayed home and largely abided by this quarantine are heroes. And hopefully our governmental people will use the same creativity they used in shutting everything down in coming up with safe and innovative ways to open the economy, because I'm ready.
I am too. I definitely would like to get some football in too at the end of this year.
Are you ready for some football? We'll have football.
Well, great. So thank you, everybody. As always, I'd encourage you to read our newspapers and or go on our websites to stay informed, and perhaps equally important these days, to find ways to be entertained with events like this. Thank you all, and please stay safe.